Hello, humans. This is Being Human. I'm your host, Richard Atherton. Carrie Bedingfield, author, TEDx speaker, elite cyclist, PhD student at Cambridge University. Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us today. Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff to get into in all that is Carrie Bedingfield, but I think perhaps the number one piece of work that you're involved in right now that's going to be a huge pain point for people in corporations is meetings, right? They suck for most of us most of the time. And as I understand it, you've developed a product called Lomo, and it's also forming part of what you're doing at Cambridge University. So maybe we could start there with, your take on meetings and how we can improve them.
Yes, meetings have been a particular fascination of mine for probably about 4 years now. I've worked quite a lot with organisations who are trying to change the way they work, improve the engagement, we love that word, don't we, of their employees. And I found that meetings were cropping up more and more in conversations with organisations. So if I opened up a conversation about engagement, or another word we love, empowerment, I would find that people would quite often say, well, if you want to engage people in this organisation, then you've got to sort out our meetings first. And I took that as a bit of a challenge and started to look at the world around me and understand why were meetings causing such a problem when so many people wanted them to change. What else was going on in the world that might inspire a shift or to move on to a new trajectory there, and what could I personally do to try and solve that problem for some of our clients?
Okay, so that's the setup for it. And what are your key findings in terms of how people need to change up how they're doing meetings?
So I think the short answer is I don't know. So I think meetings are I wouldn't go so far as to say they are a wicked problem, but they are a problem hugely worth addressing, but which appears to me to be quite resistant to change. Does wicked have a special meaning there, or are you meaning it in biblical terms, or? Yeah, so a wicked problem was first sort of described, I think, back in the 60s by Herbert Simon, and describes those big, complex problems where even the definition of the problem is difficult for people to agree on, let alone what the solution might be. And it tends to get bandied around as a word used in politics, geopolitics, that kind of thing, or healthcare, things that we regard as these enormous, meaty, cross-socio-cultural challenges. And it kind of means it's really, 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 really difficult. And their meetings are not necessarily enormous geopolitical socio-constructs, etc., all these excellent long words that we used to mean really, really difficult. I do think meetings tick some of those boxes. So they are an unpredictable system. They seem to resist study. They seem to resist change. And there are many kind of different people involved who see meetings really differently. So there's kind of no one accepted, right, well, this is the problem with meetings, and here are 3 ways that you can make them better.
Okay. Right. But as I understand it, Lomo was an attempt to come up with some suggestions or guidelines, right?
So I guess when I first started to tackle the problem, I felt that meetings in general were a throwback from very 20th century ways of working. So they were hierarchical, they followed a very linear structure, they often were very content rich, so people will be talking a lot about a specific piece of content, whether that's the technology they're discussing or the legal issue they're discussing, whatever the content of the conversation was, but devoting very little time to figuring out what is the best way, why are we having this conversation, and what's the best way to have it. So So I tried to make something that would enable people to have a much more where power would be much more distributed across people, so much more a genuinely participative meeting, and where the purpose was really clear. So one of the things I think happens in meetings is that people go into them with either a slightly different or a very different understanding of what that meeting's for. And if you've got a different picture in your head to somebody else in that meeting, then that's when you end up going round in circles. And it's also where a lot of that tension and friction and frustration in meetings comes. For example, if we're having a meeting with some other people and I think we're generating ideas to try and solve a problem, and somebody else thinks that we're critiquing ideas or making a decision, then we're going to have a really frustrating conversation. We kind of know that anyway from creativity and innovation research. We know that if we're generating ideas, brainstorming, whatever technique we're using, if somebody else is shutting them down and in a kind of deciding mode, that just kills off the ideas. But it kind of goes further than that as well. So imagine if one person thinks that they're sharing information. So all they're doing is kind of making visible some information that's useful to other people in the meeting. And someone else thinks that they should be giving feedback on that data or helping with something. And again, hugely frustrating. I'm just sharing my information and you're now telling me what you think I should be doing with it and whether it's right or wrong. So one of the things I felt was hugely important was to find a way to have people have the same picture in their head about what we're actually doing right now. So if we're having ideas, let's all do that together. And now if we're going to make some decisions about those ideas we've come up with so far, then let's do that together. And if we're sharing information, let's just share information. And if we're asking people to critique or judge or help with that information, then let's know that too. So to be more explicit.
Okay, that makes sense, because I can definitely recall meetings where I've gone in and I thought, oh, hey, I'm just here to update you on some stuff I've been doing. And suddenly I'm in a barrage of critique. I'm like, whoa, I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared for this, right? That moment.
Exactly right. And yet that data that people have is hugely important. And just because you weren't ready for that in that moment, or that wasn't your expectation, it doesn't mean that you didn't want or need or would find that data extremely valuable. But it's that clash of intention that is a problem.
I see. Yeah.
And another thing that I have seen beyond just meetings, but it particularly applies to meetings as well, is as we have this trend for reducing hierarchy, flatter organisations, it's not happening everywhere, but I think most places would like it to happen more to feel that people are empowered. We all love that word. And for decision-making to move closer to people who are doing the work. So as we were on that trend, and also most leaders and managers are moving away or learning to move away from a sort of old-style dictatorial style of command and control. That is an obvious big trend that's been going on for decades now. And in removing some of that hierarchy, also what gets removed is the structure as well. So in not wanting to dictate something, people are confusing removing that hierarchy with removing structure. And my argument is that we should be removing the hierarchy or peeling it back, certainly, but we should be keeping a new helpful structure. Because without the structure, actually just the unsaid power dynamics play out. And we're all looking around each other for cues about what is it okay to do or not do. And actually some structure can provide the freedom for people to know how they're expected to contribute, know it's okay to do something. And in fact, there's a big body of work called Liberating Structures. There's an interesting book by the same title of 33 meeting types, all designed to liberate people to make a better contribution through structure.
Okay, right. 33 different meeting types.
That's right. So 33 is a lot. Yeah, 33 is a lot. It might take
you the whole meeting to work out which meeting you're having.
That's right. So that's one of the challenges with liberating structures. Much as I love it, and I do think the principles from which it's derived are absolutely spot on, I think 33 is too many, and most people I know would feel the same. So when I developed Lomo, I tried to develop a smaller set of meetings, but I still ended up with 11. And 11 is also quite a lot. So I then cut that back to 6. And actually, I ignored a whole load of meetings. So I said, any meetings that are to do with generating ideas or making decisions, actually, they are, relatively speaking, well served. So there's a ton of stuff on creativity techniques. There's actually quite a lot on decision making. But I'm just going to focus on meetings where once you've figured out, once you know what a team is supposed to be doing, how can that team meet together in a way that is hugely effective in making important information visible, unblocking things quickly, spotting new risks as they emerge, understanding what's being learnt as something is being done, and therefore how the project needs to adapt and change. So I just looked at those, and I even honed that down to 3 in the end.
Good, easily rememberable. And those are on the Lomo site. You created a website around it, haven't you? And people can download templates.
So you can certainly download the open source template for one of them, and the others are in the process of going up. And I guess the question mark has been, or what has divided the nation of meeting goers is what format you want to, what tool is useful to help you change a meeting. So Lomo is actually in the form of a canvas. Many people, certainly in the entrepreneurial world, are familiar with business model canvas, with lean canvas, javelin board, that idea of a big piece of paper with some instructions, some boxes to fill in, and a kind of process to go through that helps you, kind of orders the process of making something quite complex happen quickly. People are quite familiar with that in my world. So I took a canvas approach. Now, the canvases are either loved or loathed. So some people find the canvases a barrier and feel like the idea of taking a big piece of paper with loads of boxes and the idea that's like a right way and a wrong way to do this meeting is unhelpful. It's too big a leap. It's too restrictive. It's too difficult to learn. The barrier to entry is too high. The barrier to introducing it in a meeting is too high. And let's talk about why meetings are difficult to change, why the barriers to changing a meeting are high a little bit later. So I at one point, I thought maybe we're just going to have to leave behind these canvases altogether. Maybe that's just how I see the world. It's a very kind of startup thing to do, and maybe nobody wants the canvases. So I started to take them out of the work that I was doing with people. And then a whole other flurry of people said, don't take away the canvases. That's the only way we know what to do. It's the only way we can kind of keep control, interesting word, how we can control a meeting. That's the thing that means that even if I'm not there facilitating a meeting, it happens in a better way than it would have done otherwise. That is the skill creator, guardrail, etc. And the more I explored it, the more I realised that it's obvious, really, that people see the world differently, and canvases work brilliantly for some people and not for others. And the question was then, well, do I just make something that works for people who love the visibly structured approach, or do I try and do something that allows anybody to implement the principles, whether they like the paper or not?
And which did you come up with?
I think still unknown. So the clients who are currently working with Lomo do like the canvases, and certainly the canvases are a good way to train facilitators to do that meeting. And what I would always say in any Lomo training or exploration session is use what's useful and discard what isn't. Because as soon as you start trying to implement things that you don't personally think are quite right for your team, but there's something in the rule book, in the structure that says you should, then you may run into trouble. And a big part of Lomo is to encourage people in meetings to use their what Frederick Laloux would call our kind of human sensing machine, the data we kind of perceive through our judgment, the data that our feelings are often trying to point us at, together with our experience and other sort of the unconscious synthesis of the knowledge that we've derived so far. People should use that more. I want to help people use that more in meetings, and certainly they should be using that in deciding how to use a canvas, how to use a meeting technique. And that's in real contrast to another set of techniques called holacracy, which I'm always surprised actually how few people in the corporate world have heard of holacracy. It hasn't even kind of appeared on many people's radars at all. Holacracy, I think, is a fantastic start to understanding how to structure a non-hierarchical business, or how to create a structure that's not based on hierarchy. It's a great leap forward, and at the same time, it's highly rules-based. So you don't have the option to choose which bits you do and don't do if you do holacracy. And though I can absolutely see why that why they've done it that way, I didn't want to do the same thing. I would say one of the founding principles of Lomo is it's based on trust and self-responsibility, and I felt that should absolutely be reflected in how you learn and experience it and how you deliver it.
Okay, so you've left it a lot more. So there's much more onus on the individual understanding the principles and applying it in their own context than
that's right.
Yeah, holacracy then. That's
right. So Lomo gives you a starting point, and if you think the alternative to a canvas-based approach, I suppose there are many alternatives, but one would be that you just learn a load of meeting techniques, and that's great and fine. But I felt like that's requiring for that to work, to change a wide variety of meetings, you'd need everybody who runs meetings or invites people to meetings to become really quite an expert meeting facilitator, and to spend quite a lot of time designing meetings and trying to and committing brain power and time to deciding how to structure a meeting. And I wanted people to just spend more time having good meetings. So I felt the Canvas approach, even with that, use your judgment to decide how you apply it and which bits you apply and in which way, nevertheless was quite a big shortcut for people who are like, I don't want to be a facilitator. I just want to be able to run better meetings with my team.
Okay.
Now, the other angle to come at all of this from, so you can start from the point of saying, we have really terrible meetings, we need to change, and lots of people do. Other people come from a completely different angle, which is we need to change this thing in our culture. We need people to take more responsibility. We need teams to gel together and really accept and pick up ownership for projects and get really good at working together to deliver something in a kind of changing, adapting environment. We want people to become faster, more agile, more great words, insert popular words of choice here. And they saw meetings as a one lever that they could use to do that, or we encourage them to see meetings as a place in which everybody can practice operating in a different way. So meetings are a real proxy for culture. And when you arrive in an organisation and you're trying to figure out how it works and who holds the power and what it's okay to do and not do and so on, actually meetings give us a huge amount of information about where power really lies and what is and isn't okay and how things work around here. So let's use that to as a sort of lever to shift towards the culture that you want, rather than try and change the culture through a culture workshop and hope that that spills over into a meeting.
That's interesting. Yeah, that makes complete sense. So you actually, you use it as a pivot point within the organisation or a focus area and spread change from there. It reminds me a bit of David Marquette's Turn the Ship Around. I don't know if you read that book. have you? And
yeah.
And one of the levers he uses where he starts is approval for leave. And when he inherited this submarine, it's actually, it should turn the submarine around. It should be cool. When he inherited the submarine, one of the first things he did to change the culture on the submarine was to change that process. So instead of needing 6 signatures for a sailor to get their leave approved, it was, I think they brought it down to 2 or 1 signatures. And so that reminds me of a similar scenario where you start in one place and then over time, and then spread out from there to change the culture.
Yeah, exactly right. And the more I look at it, the more I think we have a set of things like that in organisations, which in my head I call this sort of soft architecture or soft furniture in an organisation. So it's not the physical building. It's not even actually probably some of it's not in a policy document anywhere. But nevertheless, they're these sort of tangible ways of working that are really quite entrenched, that without changing those, it's very difficult for anything else to change. But actually, if you can change those, you can make a big difference very quickly. So another one is budgeting. And if you've read Beyond Budgeting, many people will have read that and felt that was hugely insightful and interesting. But how many organisations are actually budgeting any differently? Same with forecasting and planning. Same to a certain extent with email. Email, though it's a newer technology, really is just an electronic way of rubber stamping things, making sure that information is captured in a written format, making sure that you can prove that people were informed, etc., etc. And there are loads of these. Performance management is another one. How performance reviews take place. Things that have things where there's an element of the organisation wants an element of control. There's an element of kind of safety. So if you do budgeting wrong, if you do people's expenses wrong, if you do their performance review wrong, then that's potentially dangerous in inverted commas. And all these things, I feel like are the culture of the organisation is really encoded into them. And if you're sending people off on a culture workshop, which is encouraging them to, take ownership and spark action and feel free to try things and take risks, that it's okay to fail, I'm just not sure how effective that is without addressing some of these other harder problems.
Okay, great. Okay, so that's meetings. I'm not sure there's. Yeah, it feels like we've had a good tour around meetings. So the other thing that you have risen to prominence around was your TEDx talk, and you shared interestingly there about this relationship operating system 1.0, and then upgrading to Freedom 9.9, this new operating system. Is that still something that you're working on and you're interested in, those ideas?
Yes,
something worth exploring.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a kind of ongoing personal mission, as in the target of the mission is myself. so trying to continually keep booting up the new operating system and also recognizing where the value of the old operating system is, because it's not valueless, it just achieves a different outcome.
And so for our listeners, what is, in a few words, what's the old operating system and the new?
So the old operating system is has applications like driving, competing, covering your ass, all the things that we do to try and stay safe in life. And for me, it was very much at work as well. So they are perfectly rational responses if you believe that the world is unsafe and that the way to stay safe is to make sure everybody knows that you're really valuable, and to kind of remain a an important person in the tribe. So somebody who doesn't make mistakes, who always delivers something brilliant, somebody who's kind of special and different. Now, being or special and valuable, I guess. And being special and valuable, I guess two things there. One is there's nothing wrong with trying to be special and wanting to be special and valuable, but it's where that intention comes from. So does it come because you're too afraid that you're going to be kicked out of the tribe, i.e. what a situation for our ancestors that would have meant that they would have to then kind of fight off tigers by themselves 24 hours a day. But, how long is that going to last? Probably not very. So a genuinely hugely dangerous situation, one for which our brains are still kind of predominantly wired. So wanting to be special and valuable is not wrong, but it is in general in our kind of more evolved and mature world, it's unhelpful if it purely comes from a place of fear. If it comes from a place of possibility, that's completely different.
And when you say purely comes from a place of fear, so it's okay to have a bit of fear, is it?
Well, so along my journey, I had a massive pendulum swing. So I swung from from being very driven, extremely driven by fear. And the more driven by fear I was, the more fear was all I could see, until I didn't even know there was another way of looking at things. Couldn't see beyond that. And I swung a very long way towards trying to live without fear entirely, and or if I possibly could, or feeling it was wrong to do anything from fear, and also moving to an incredibly high trust model. And that caused me a couple of problems along the way. So particularly at work, it meant that I stepped back. I took too many steps back too quickly. I think people really, really valued the fact that I was no longer quite such a difficult person to work with, and I was much more encouraging and supportive. But I think what they lost was a bit of structure, a bit of accountability, and playing the kind of backstop role, and also taking full responsibility for the governance of the businesses that I owned 100% of the shares of. And I think I took too many steps back from that.
And what happened when you took too many steps back?
Things carried along just fine on the surface for quite a while, maybe a year and a half. But under the surface, problems had emerged which had not been made visible and not been addressed. And that meant that a number of important client relationships kind of ran aground, partly because they were client relationships that I had probably sold in the first instance, and without me providing structure, directions, proper support and accountability to the new team delivering, it's very difficult for them to effectively deliver what I had sold. And I'm sure that resonates with many, many, many other people who own and manage their own businesses. But I hadn't even really put in place enough kind of accountability structure that as that became an issue, it would be visible and we could deal with it. So it kind of got squirreled away because nobody wanted, so nobody did anything wrong, nobody tried to cover anything up, but nobody wanted to say, oh, Carrie, by the way, this is all really difficult now and we don't know what to do about it, and it's really getting really, really difficult. So that inevitably changed the shape of the business, not just because we kind of had the wrong people trying to do the wrong work with not enough support and structure, but also because the market had changed and our product was probably came from, our product was tired, and it was always a difficult product anyway. So a new business emerged, and one where people had much more of a shared stake in risk and reward. And I realised I needed to, that living in a wonderful world of trust was great, but that didn't mean that I had to stop logging into the bank accounts and checking everything there, that I had to stop asking penetrating or searching questions that are by contrast, that was my response, my absolute sort of fiscal and cultural responsibility to do that.
Right, and this reminds me a bit of a quote. I think Ron Jeffries who said, autonomy without accountability is just a vacation.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And actually, nobody wants to go on a vacation where the money's running out and they're not having a lot of fun and they don't quite know what to do about it. And the person who is driving the bus on the trip has kind of gone for a really long ciggy. That it's not fun trying to run somebody else's business or deliver somebody else's project without enough help and support and guide rails for what you need based on your skill level and so on.
So it wasn't particularly fun for them and it wasn't particularly fun for you to watch it.
And I think to the credit of all of us, they'd also seen my TEDx talk and really wanted to support me in this new high trust journey. And everybody tried really, really, really hard to make an old model work. But it just couldn't. It couldn't. So if we think about Reptile 1.0 being all about driving and striving and perfection and control and trying to make things happen, Freedom 9.9, there are two massive apps. I'm sure there are lots of little apps, but there are two massive apps in it. And one's called Accepting and one's called Allowing. And I had to accept that old model didn't work and allow it to change and allow it to fail first. So we didn't go out of business. And luckily we were a business that never really ended up in any kind of serious cash problem. But that doesn't mean we didn't burn quite a lot of cash to get to that level of understanding that would allow me to let go of it. And that was the journey that we had to go on.
But you came close, did you, to a problem with the business?
We came relatively close because it's very difficult to allow a model to fail or a team to fail without providing them with lots of and keep all your resources and say, well, frankly, we've still got tons of cash, but you're not generating enough cash, so you're going to have to change or go. That felt very in my world as it was then. That felt very unfair, and I also felt like I was absolutely a participant and a colluder in how we'd got to where we were with all good intentions, and it didn't feel very fair to say, so the cost of us all learning this is you all need to change your jobs, but I'm going to keep the money. That didn't feel fair. But then what I guess a bit like Malthus's population theory, that there'll be this enormous population explosion and then suddenly there was enormous crisis and mass starvation and famine and disease and so on, and the population will crash. Actually, that isn't generally what happens, and nor was it seemed obvious to me that wasn't the right thing to happen in the business. There was no point like driving the car until it had completely run out of fuel and then saying, oh, well, that didn't work. So there came a point where I was like, well, if we keep going, all the evidence over the last few years points to the fact that with all our hardest work and great intentions, we can't make this work in this way. And if we keep going, we are going to run out of money and then we'll definitely all lose our jobs. So let's do something while we've got enough money and time to do that in a way we would like to do it. But that doesn't mean it was easy in any way or pain-free, quite the reverse.
So does that mean you sort of step back from this full trust type operating model and put in some more accountability and a bit more fear back into the system, or what how would you characterize it?
Yes, I think fear does have a role to play, absolutely, in our lives in general and in work, but it's a pretty small role in general. So I certainly didn't try and put any fear back in, and nor did I try and take away any trust, but I did try to add in as a sort of helpful tension counter, more clarity about what was and wasn't, what we could and couldn't live on. So, right, what's our new family budget? What do we need to live on. So let's get absolutely clear about that. Let's put in more visibility. So please, will you share this information with me every month and give me your commentary on it and tell me what you think's working, what you think isn't working, what you're worried about, what help you need, and heads up for something you think I need to, anything that you think would surprise me if I didn't hear about it now. And I also, we put in place a peer-to-peer support conversation. And actually what that meant was we had an hour every Monday where the managing director and I could talk about whatever was most important that we want, either information we wanted to share, a problem we wanted to solve together, or something we were worried about. And we used a Lomo format for that. So we used a Lomo called On the Fly, where at the start of that, we'd spend 5 minutes creating little cards online that would say what the situation is right now, where I'm trying to get to, and what help I need from you. And that might say things like, the situation is that we've got a marketing campaign underway for this product, and we're halfway through. Where I'm trying to get to, we're halfway through, and it's not as successful as we thought it was going to be. Where I'm trying to get to is to make changes for the second half so that it will work and give us what we need and what I'd like you to do. So you have to be really clear on this. It might be, I just want you to listen while I tell you what I'm going to do, or I want you to give me some advice. So I'll tell you all the problems and you just tell me what you do, or I want you to coach me. So I want you to ask me some good questions, or I want us to brainstorm it together. But the person raising the card took full responsibility for what they wanted the other person to do. And then we'd order them. We take it in turns every other week. So I'd order it 1 week, like in priority order. And the other person would do it the other week. And anything we didn't get to in that hour would go in a car park, and it would then kind of it would flow over to the following week and get reprioritized alongside whatever was important that week. And a few things happened. So it meant that the managing director and I both we were much, much, much more efficient at talking about things. It was much easier to help each other. So when you're trying to context switch from problem to problem, it's really helpful if somebody frames that up very clearly for you. We started to raise more and more things we were worried about, even if we didn't know what the answer was. We problem solved things much more quickly, and we started to raise things that would have sat under the surface possibly for years. So managing director and I had actually worked together for the best part of a decade in that business. So we'd gone through our own journey in our relationship, and in general, I felt we had a really good relationship anyway, but nevertheless, there's always things in a long-term relationship that you feel like it's just not okay to say that, or if I say that, that's going to confirm that she thinks I'm X, or I daren't ask that because I don't want to kind of imply Y. But we got much braver about raising things because we put them on cards, and there was the time and the space to do it. And we addressed head on some really big, meaty things. And I found that incredibly useful. And actually probably our final year together was the most productive it could have been. And it probably that was the gestation period for being able to say, despite a great relationship, both being effective at our jobs, lots of good accountability and goals and everything, we just can't make this work. So that's great. Let's crack on and do things differently.
Right. So like a Gwyneth Paltrow sort of conscious uncoupling.
Yeah. Now, and that's right. And I do think inevitably in that situation where one person's an employee and one person is the business owner, the power dynamic, there are multiple power dynamics, and they're not all in one direction. So I don't, for a moment want to kind of smooth over how easy or difficult that was. But I think what I can say is as soon as that was kind of resolved between us, like what was going to happen next, almost immediately, so within 24 hours, I would say our relationship returned to being as supportive, constructive, warm as it had ever been. And throughout our kind of final couple of months that we worked together, I felt that she was incredibly generous in how supportive she was of me, how well she prepared a handover, how thoughtfully she handled things like talking to clients. You know, there was huge generosity, and we remain great friends now. And I think that's probably pretty unusual.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's very unusual, isn't it, for business partners to uncouple in that way. And it sounds to me like the on the fly format, which sounded so simple, contributed to that.
It did. And actually, one of the principles of Lomo is that if you're asking people to take much more responsibility, or you're inviting them to take more responsibility, the system is structured so that they have greater accountability, greater control, they're trusted, etc. Then you've got to provide a space where they can get support very, very easily and quickly. And that's that's why we called it peer-to-peer. That's a totally normal part of managing your work and doing your work is running things past other people all the time, not because they're your manager and they know what to do better, but because other people have things in their head you don't know. And it's how, the process of unpacking something with someone else can really help. And we really tried to, so we baked that in to just how we did business, but also Lomo tries to bake that in as well.
And the point about writing things down first really resonates. So certainly my experience in workshops where you have people write things on Post-its or write them down first, it's like it's a stepping stone to saying something out loud. And if you just ask them to say it out loud immediately, then there'd be a much higher barrier to communicating that thought or feeling. Whereas if you have them write it down first, then it seems like a much lower step to read what you've just written down than to say it off the bat.
And it's a form of kind of short-term memory capture. So a lot of these things we do in Lomo meetings are part of like group memory. So they aren't things that necessarily need to be remembered after the meeting, or they may be, but while we're in it, we're kind of capturing things outside of our head, both for our own purposes, because once I've got that thought on paper, I can think another one. I can kind of let go of that one and think another different one. And exactly as you say, you're creating some separation between person and thought. The other thing that I think is really useful, we did it online, but it's almost more effective, it's at least as effective and probably more when you do it face to face. Is in a meeting, you typically sit in a circle, and sometimes it's a kind of, there's a power is distributed around that circle. So the circle will have one end that's the power end. And sometimes the other end is like the second power end. It's like whoever's got the direct sight line of the power person. And then everybody else is sort of trying to make eye contact around. And then a circle is great. There are many reasons why we use a circle. But one of the downsides of a circle is it kind of puts you all in a position, a different axis, a different degree on the circle. So it's almost saying, well, I've got my position geographically here, and yours is definitely different from mine because it's geographically over there. And even though we're not sitting opposite each other in an obviously adversarial way, we are adopting geographical positions. Once you use Post-it notes, and then cluster, or a canvas, this is partly what the canvas is designed to do. Canvas goes up on the wall, or goes on part of the table, and people kind of orient themselves around it. You've then got everybody on the same side looking at all the data together.
Okay, so they're not managing, negotiating sort of power dynamics across this human space. They're orientating themselves towards the object, and that diffuses some of that.
It can do. And I think our bodies and our physicality give us tons of clues, tell our brain what's going on and how to operate. So just as I find it fascinating that not only does the process of smiling make you feel happier, you can kind of see that's pretty obvious. But actually, if you ask people to hold a pen in their mouth, this is where video would be useful.
I'll do it now.
Yeah, so just for the listeners out there, Rich has got a pen in his mouth. I'm going to ask him to put it in as if he's sucking a lollipop.
Okay.
There we go, in it goes. And now to change it so it's as if he's gripping it horizontally with his teeth.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So if I asked you to complete a questionnaire saying how happy you felt in a variety of situations with a pen in your mouth, you would feel happier with the pen in your mouth, gripping it with your teeth horizontally, which is not really a smile, but it's closer to a smile than sucking it like a lollipop.
Right.
And the idea that just even our mouth forming part of the shape of a smile makes our brain feel that we're happier is, to me, utterly extraordinary. So the power of geography in a meeting and in many things in life is really powerful.
Right. And there you're the geography of is it geography, or is it which muscles in your face are getting activated?
Well, so I guess it's not geography. I have a degree in geography, so you'd hope I'd know what geography was, and perhaps it isn't that. You're right. It's the physical orientation. It's what we can see, what we can feel, what our muscles are doing. It's a physical experience that connects to a mental process and possibly an emotion.
Right. Yeah. The other thing that comes to mind is I've actually experienced a session that you facilitated once, and it was a stand-up, and we were all giving updates about what we'd done the day before. And many of us were looking at you and trying to get, you were facilitating this, looking at you, getting eye contact when we were giving our update. And you're like, don't look at me. And and I get that's because you didn't want to create a paradigm where I'm updating you, right? I'm actually just sort of offering my update to the center of the circle. Is that the idea?
Exactly, yeah. So we were in a Checkin meeting then. We were in a Checkin Lomo in Cape Town, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I do remember. I can remember.
And in fact, I had that exact conversation yesterday at a Lomo workshop with a client, where we talked about how to use Checkin to encourage people to take full responsibility for their work and to encourage them to update each other. Because actually, if all that's happening is 5 people around a circle are updating one project manager, if there's kind of one locus of each piece of that information, then it would be a bit easier to do that one-to-one. It'd be more efficient to do it one-to-one. So if you genuinely think that it's useful to do that together as a group, then the assumption must be it's powerful for other people. It's useful for other people to hear that information. And therefore, eye contact is one of the things that shows where we're sending that information and what matters. Now, eye contact in meetings in general, I think, is really important or really fascinating. So sometimes in meetings I'll ask, or in a sort of Lomo training session, I might say, who's the most powerful? Okay, just quickly, everybody, tell me who's the most powerful person in this room. Everybody has a little laugh and a kind of embarrassed chuckle. Or you can ask, can I just check who's the most important person in the room? Or this is my really brave one. Sorry, everybody, just before we start, can you tell me who's the highest paid person here? And then good embarrassed laugh at that. But actually, it's really easy to tell. I can't tell who's the most highest paid person, though you can usually guess that. But you can tell who the most powerful person in the room is in that instance. Doesn't mean they'll always be the most powerful in that group. But right now, who's the most powerful? Because once a difficult question is thrown out, or something that's potentially controversial, what you see is everybody's eyes sliding across the room to the person whose facial expression they want to read, or whose cue they want to take. And that's a really simple way of identifying some of the power dynamics in a meeting. So in a check-in, it makes sense for what I encourage project managers to do, if they want the outcome that the team is seeing itself as a seamless unit working together rather than reporting to the project manager and awaiting instructions from the project manager for decisions, then to not have the project manager sit in the centre and say, right, everybody, okay, Angus, off you go. Raoul, great, now you. Thanks, everybody, right. No, you go next, and actually the extension of that is don't use your eyes to control the pace of the contributions either. Let the room speak to each other.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And I think what I'm hearing as well is, back to very early in this conversation, you mentioned structure. And so if you take that away, you take the hierarchy away, well, in order for it to still be effective for people to know what to do, at least initially, then having a structure in place makes sense, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, to replace that. But by the way, I know exactly what you're doing about knowing exactly who's the most powerful. I went on a men's weekend once, and we all had to stand in silence at the start of this weekend, and we were sort of put into groups, and we were given the instruction, okay, in your mini groups, men, I'd like all of you to sit down, and the last person standing is the most powerful person in your mini group and will be the leader for the weekend. And and we all picked our leaders. And I was like fighting it out. There was two of us left standing, and I was fighting it out with this guy. And damn it, I'm not. And ultimately, I could see just like, no, you're definitely more powerful than I am. And I sat myself down, and that guy led the weekend. So yeah, you're right. There's something innate in all of us, isn't we? We just know at some human level, don't we? It's a strange.
We do, and I guess this takes me probably to my kind of final. The final kind of aspect of Lomo and meetings that we haven't, the important part that we haven't talked about, which is how tribal they are, which is one of the reasons I think they're so resistant to change, is I think they're such a metaphor for tribe within the organisation. And I think we often feel we end up behaving in a way that treats the group as a tribe. So if you've ever had that thing where you've all put your ideas on Post-it notes and you put them all on the wall and everybody's voted on, or some kind of process of sharing ideas and having the best one decided, have you ever kind of looked up and thought, is it mine? Did mine won? Yeah, mine won, even though ideas aren't owned and we've not put our names against any of them, but you're so delighted that your idea won. We're seeking to be right, valuable, make a contribution. We also sometimes we want to shake up the leadership. So we're deliberately controversial because we're trying to kind of rattle the grip of the leader off its hinges a little bit, because we're trying to sort of assert our own authority. So we're deliberately brittle or unhelpful. Or challenging, and sometimes we do the opposite. We say nothing, or we don't say what is appearing in our head as the useful contribution, because we don't want to rattle the leadership or say something that might be perceived as not valuable or unhelpful. And all these things are just tribal. Our tribal instincts. Totally rational if we're using that part of our brain. And so what I've tried to do with Lomo is create something that not only do you not need to be an amazing facilitator to have a great meeting, you don't depend on the skill of the person who's technically facilitating it, but it also tries to release people's grip from some of those tribal instincts. So for example, you're very happy to listen to somebody else's point of view because the process allows you to critique it later, and that's a totally normal part of it. You don't have to fight for your right to critique it. That's already baked into the meeting, and that.
Okay, so sort of working with the grain of these human dynamics, but in a way that has us be more efficient and a bit less driven by some of these more primal.
Exactly, and then those kind of it was really just a whole succession of those to help bring out the great data and the great insight and see new things and make better decisions, but whilst allowing that human need to get met in a structured way. Because my view is, if you don't meet the human need of somebody in a meeting, it'll get met somehow. They'll find a way to get it met, either in that meeting or later on.
Right.
So my view is, if you want a task, if the task has a need, you've got to meet the human need as well. Otherwise, the task won't get done.
Brilliant. Yeah. Okay. Good. So perhaps we're coming towards a close there. Is there anything else? So you're finishing your PhD. How much longer have you got to go on your PhD?
I've got 2 more years.
2 more years. And are you starting to get a sense of what might come out of it? Is there a Lomo 2.0 or another book, or what? What do you think?
Yes. Yeah. I think I'm trying to. So in every discipline, there are points in which you build on what previous people have done in quite a sequential, incremental way, and there are points at which then you turn a corner and you start to build on it in a different way, so using a different methodology or looking at it in a different way. And I think I would like to help meeting science, as it is known, to turn.
Wow, there's a thing.
I know, it's wonderful, isn't it? To turn a corner, so to look at meetings more systematically, look at them more systemically. So what role do they play in getting work done, culture, etc. Exactly how that will be done, I don't know. But I guess the 2 things that are driving it, one is to help better work get done. So to have work that's been decided done better, completed better. But secondly, to allow more humans to have better experiences in meetings. So to leave a meeting feeling better about themselves, feeling like they contributed. That's all we want at work. None of us want to do a terrible job, or, to be lazy or to be unhelpful or have it. Really, most people don't want conflict. What most people want to do is to feel valued and that they were able to use their skills and contribute. And a meeting is a massive, very public arena for doing that. And my research has to make a contribution to that.
Great. Okay, final question to all my guests. So, Carrie Bedingfield, for you, what does it mean to be human?
For me, it means somehow reconciling that my kind of enormous, almost untamable desire to do things, make things, create things, make things happen, with my inherent, physical and mental limitations, or and my humanity. So to create and do and fulfill my natural instinct to make and do as much as I possibly can, but not at the cost of my personal sanity, mental health, and to start to see myself as somebody. We talked at the very beginning about, is it okay to want to be special and valuable? And that yes, absolutely it is, but not if it comes from a place, it's not so helpful if it comes from a place of fear. But what I've come to realise is we're special and valuable no matter what. This is what I had never understood. And so to feel that I am special and valuable inside out, and to use that as a platform to create and do things.
Wonderful. You're special and valuable to me, Carrie.
Thank you.
Okay, so where can people find you? What's the best place if they want to learn more?
Yeah, I'm at carriebedingfield.com, and on Twitter I'm at cbedingfield, and it's just 1D. Just 1D.
And Lomo there's a website for that, right?
Yeah, Lomo is, so you can find a link to Lomo on my personal website. Lomo is lomo-meetings.co.uk.
Awesome. Carrie, well, thank you for being human. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right.